Hello and welcome to another edition of From the Newsroom, the podcast, and this time videocast broadcast from the Holland Sentinel. I'm here today, reporter Arpan Lobo, and I'm joined by my two bosses, our managing editor Audra Gamble. Hi, Audra.
Hey, how's it going, Arpan?
I'm doing okay. I'm hanging in there. And then
Hanging in there, yeah.
our executive editor, the chief, Sarah Leach. Sarah, how's it going?
It's going okay. I'm still alive.
Well, that's always good to hear. And it's especially good so we can kind of talk about this crazy election week that's going on in America, from the national presidential race, which looks all but decided, down to our local races in Holland. So, Audra, our newsroom has been on top of this. Well, been covering the election for months because,
Right.
Election day is really just when the votes start being counted. It's not when, the election begins. And so we've been tracking races up and down the ballot. And so we decided it would be, kind of good to start this kind of discussion around with our local races. So kind of in addition to the president, which is presidency, which is on the top of everybody's mind, what kinds of other races, are important for voters, listeners, readers to pay attention to? And then we can kind of get into how those played out in our area.
Yeah, I mean, I think, going into this, we kept telling our readers, this is not going to be just an election night. This is going to be an election week. Let's sort of brace ourselves for what that really is. And now that we're on what I would like to call Fourth Tuesday, also known as Friday, it's been a real rough week. I mean, we knew it, but man, it's just been kind of killer for everybody. I don't know that I've ever watched this much CNN in my entire life combined, but that's all right. We're getting through. So yeah, some of the local things that we've been tracking since Tuesday before Tuesday. One of the ones that we were tracking really closely was a new judge in Ottawa County. I think a lot of times people think as sort of the big picture, gosh, the president is the most important thing that I can vote for on this ballot. A lot of times, sometimes people will just vote for that and then turn in the rest of their ballot not filled in. But man, if you ever have a traffic ticket, if you ever, get into some legal trouble, this will be one of two judges in the Holland branch of the 58th District Court that you're gonna stand in front of. So some of those local things, while you may not have seen as many ads or heard as much about, are far more impactful on your daily life. So the judgeship that we were talking about is the Holland 50th District Court judge replacing Judge Susan Jonas, who just aged out. She's no longer eligible to run again. So we had Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Juanita Bocanegra, and she was running against Vern Helder, who's a magistrate in the court system in Ottawa County. It was pretty close for quite a lot of the night. So that was something we kept our eyes on really, really closely. We also had quite a few state house races. We had a couple of, congressional races for DC. We had a county commissioner race that ended up flipping partway through the night as results came in. We had a few school board things. One of them is a little tricky because they were all write-in candidates. So we don't actually know the results of that quite yet, because that takes a little while to generate that report. So there are still a few little kind of hanging on bits that we're keeping track of. But yeah, definitely a busy week for local politics and obviously also national.
Right. And as we kind of break down those local, statewide, national results, a couple of the races we were looking at specifically, as you mentioned, at the DC level, where we had 3 contested congressional races. Republicans won in all 3. Those are 3 West Michigan districts. We have 2, which is Ottawa County up to Muskegon and above, kind of the Lakeshore County as we think of it. Then we had 6, which is Southwest Michigan. Kalamazoo is kind of the base of that county. It goes down to the border. And then, while not in the Holland Sentinel's coverage area, our sister paper, the Ionia Sentinel Standard, is located in the 3rd district, which is most known for having Grand Rapids in there. So those were the 3 we were looking at. One of those was sort of competitive. The 3rd district was closer than it had been in many years. That was the district Justin Amash was representing. He left after leaving the Republican Party. he flirted with running as a third party candidate for president for like 2 minutes, and then
Yeah, briefly.
walked away from it, decided not to run for re-election. So it was down to Republican Peter Meyer and Democrat Hillary Scholten. Meyer won that race by 6 points. After election night, Meyer was kind of ahead in by a pretty substantial margin. And this is going to be a theme as we talk about all these races. When those absentee ballots, those mailed-in ballots started trickling in, it became closer. The Meyer campaign specifically did not declare victory until the city of Grand Rapids was 100% in. And so he will be the next rebepresentative of that district. It remains a Republican, or it goes back to a Republican district.
Right, kind of reverts, yeah.
Maybe about 10 months of having being a libertarian district, but now it's back in Republican hands. And then in the Holland Sentinel's coverage area, the 2nd district will remain to be represented by Rep. Bill Huizinga, who is now going to a 6th term in Congress. He defeated challenger Brian Berghoff, a pastor from Holland who was running as a Democratic candidate. He won that race by about 21 points, with the majority of the expected votes counted. And then finally, in that 6th district we mentioned, Fred Upton is going back to Congress, and this race really wasn't close. For reference, in 2018, Fred Upton won re-election, but he won by 5 points, which at the time was one of his closest, and remains one of his closest kind of re-election races ever. And the expectation from Democrats nationally and in the state of Michigan was that it was going to be a close race again. John Hoadley, who is a term-limited state rep representing the Kalamazoo area, also would have been the first openly gay representative from Michigan to go to Congress, ended up losing by 21 points, which is
much more than was expected.
Much more than was expected.
Yeah, I mean, Fred Upton is very well known. He's has quite an established base in the area, but Democrats are eyeing that seat as a possible flip or close to sort of deal. And as we watched those results come in, it was just so abundantly clear that was not that was not the case. Once the ballots had been cast. Right. And I did want to mention too, Arpan, in that judgeship that we tracked, Juanita Bocanegra was successful in that race. So it's not entirely official, partially just because there's not like kind of amazing records on this, but we're fairly certain that she's the first Latina judge in Ottawa County. So that's something of note as well, and we'll be continuing to report on that judgeship over the weekend. So that's a big win for her, and also kind of continues that pipeline of judges coming from the Ottawa County Prosecutor's Office. Her counterpart in Holland, Judge Bradley Knoll, who is the chief judge of the 58th District Court, also came from the prosecutor's office. So that's a pretty typical, line of succession, I guess, going from the prosecutor's office to a judgeship in the county.
Right. And before, we kind of wrap up on our local and congressional races, Sarah, I want to bring you in because you've been waiting patiently while Audra and I ramble about.
Great.
Yeah, well, you and I, back when we worked in the office, you and I at least maybe 4 or 5 times a week would chat just about these races at the congressional level. And when Berghoff announced his campaign in July of 2019, which feels like decades ago at this point.
That was at least 17 years ago.
Something about that. One of Huizinga's previous challenger, Dr. Rob Davidson, was part of that kind of rollout for Berghoff's campaign. And something you mentioned to me, because I wasn't at the Sentinel when that race went down, something you mentioned to me that was Davidson was everywhere when it came to holding events and doing stuff like that. And obviously, the coronavirus pandemic kind of threw a wrench into every single campaign's plan in terms of, the whole get out the vote strategy. A lot of things had to pivot to over the phone, and like we're doing right now virtually. Not all candidates, decided to keep things that way. Some decided to go back to in-person events. But Sarah, I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the second district race and really our congressional races as a whole before we move on to the presidency and some other national issues.
Yeah, I think that this was just a completely different campaign style. I mean, even though it was clear that Rob Davidson, the former challenger to Heisinga's seat, was a strong supporter. In fact, he was one of the people that tipped us off that Berghoff was declaring his candidacy right in the very beginning. Berghoff had a different style, completely different personalities. I think that Rob Davidson was much more aggressive about going door to door, reaching out to communities that he didn't normally have interactions with. We saw support letters coming in to be on the Hound Sentinel's opinion page quite early. It felt like with Berghoff's campaign, the declaration, the candidacy announcement was made, and then it just kind of seemed like a lot didn't happen for like the next 6 months. I mean, even before COVID hit, it just didn't really feel like there was much momentum there. And it's not to say that he didn't have his supporters, but I have the feeling that he was just kind of staying amongst familiar groups. And I think that if they would have made a much more larger sustained push, we probably would have seen a little bit of a closer vote, because I think that the race from 2 years ago indicated that there was some support of maybe wanting a change in leadership, or at least a little bit of an appetite for that. Healthcare was something that Davidson, obviously being an ER doctor, he campaigned on very heavily. Berghoff, a lot had changed with the Trump presidency, so then Berghoff was campaigning on the idea that there's too much division in the country, which culminates in the cues that were being given by President Donald Trump, and that the current representative Huizenga was kind of, fostering that division as well. And so he was trying to campaign on, I'm the candidate of dignity and respect, and let's restore, these common graces. And I just don't think that was really a strong enough, platform to really give people the appetite to make a switch.
Right, and the second district is safely Republican.
Yes.
Even with Davidson being Heisinga's closest challenger, he lost by 12 points. It's not as if it was a toss-up ever.
Yeah,
so
I think, we tend to make more of it than what it should. The reason why we make more of it is because it was probably the most competitive that seat has been probably ever. For a Democrat to even come within, 20 points of potentially knocking out a Republican incumbent was unheard of. So us in the local media make it out to be a little bit more than what it actually is, because in any other district on earth, this would be nothing to really talk about.
Right. And as we're kind of running out of time here, we have about 10 minutes left on our Zoom call. But one of the big things we wanted to talk about is kind of the shape of the presidential race at the top of the ticket. Right now, it appears it has not been officially called by the Associated Press, which is what the Sentinel and a lot of other national media outlets rely on to declare a winner in the presidency. But it appears that Joe Biden will have won enough states to reach 270 electoral votes. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada are really the four states that are kind of in the balance right now. And it looks like he's ahead in all of those states. They're still counting ballots, but it appears that Biden will have won the electoral votes to unseat President Trump. Mm-hmm. Now, things have been a little complicated this time because President Trump has...
Just a tad.
Just a tad. President Trump has... he's done this for months, but it's really come to a head this week as things have become clear that he's losing. He's cast doubt on the validity of the elections and the validity of the democratic process, which has led to his campaign filing lawsuits in a multitude of states, including Michigan, where one was thrown out yesterday in the Court of Claims, where he's trying to, in some states, he's trying to stop the vote. In some states, he wants to continue the vote. It's really unclear. There isn't a uniform strategy other than do whatever it needs to be done for me to win this thing. Because right now, it does not look like a concession is coming anytime soon. Last night, President Trump, I don't want to call it a press briefing because he didn't take any questions, but he stood on the White House podium with the seal of the president. It's a violation of the Hatch Act, but nobody cares about that anymore, to basically cast doubt on the elections process and saying there is widespread fraud, and that's why Joe Biden is in a position that he is, where it looks like he's going to reach 270. Audra, Sarah, your guys' thoughts on the lawsuits and kind of this entire situation where really it's unprecedented to have a sitting president, a major political party candidate of, either side, to just cast this much doubt, and really just lie about the things that are going on across these states without providing any evidence. We can't say he's doing anything other than lying.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was striking, and we talked about this as a staff a little bit. I've never seen that many news networks cut away so quickly from a presidential statement. I think CNN was the one that stayed with them the longest, but I mean, gosh, MSNBC was like 30 seconds in and they were out. I mean, it was like kind of wild. In that statement, Donald Trump made some claims specifically about Michigan. He said that there was fraud going on in Michigan's vote, and that his people weren't being allowed in Cobo Hall in Detroit, where there were a large number of ballot counters for the city of Detroit. He also said that he was winning Michigan, and then all of a sudden, magically there were additional ballots that were all for Joe Biden. I just want to be clear that none of that is true. At no point did Donald Trump win the state of Michigan. You can't win a state until the ballots are counted. And the fact of the matter is that the ballots have been counted, and that Joe Biden won the state by far more votes than Donald Trump won it in 2016 when it flipped red for him. So there's no really way to say that other than that is a blatant lie coming from the president, from the lectern in the White House press briefing room. I mean, that's what happened.
And Sarah, this is something we spoke about before recording. You mentioned that in these states where Trump appeared to be ahead with the votes counted, that it was the mailed-in absentee ballots that had swung the balance. And this isn't random. There's a specific reasons kind of why this is. For example, a lot of these state legislatures, which are controlled by Republicans, like in Michigan, declined to give local clerks and counting boards more time to count the ballots. In Michigan, they had 10 hours to process the absentee ballots, which if you talk to clerks in large cities, and even not so large cities, like even in Holland, which is about 35,000 people, about 17,000 voted total, even our local clerk was like, well, the extra time will help, but we'll see if it's enough. And also, for President Trump to kind of cast doubt on why are the mail-in ballots so skewed toward Biden, it's because for months on end, you said that mail-in ballots were kind of fraudulent, and that if you're looking to get votes from seniors and people that are concerned about the coronavirus pandemic who want to vote by mail, if you cast doubt on that, they might not cast a ballot at all. It's really just kind of jarring to see us in this situation.
I think that from a reporting perspective, it allowed us to actually kind of make better predictions on election day as we started to get some returns in. We knew kind of how to quantify the votes before we knew what the votes were, because things have been so politicized leading into the election, limiting the time of processing beforehand, knowing that the majority of the mail-in vote would statistically favor Democrats over Republicans. And so, a lot of states counted the in-person vote, which, because of politics, again, tended to favor Trump because he was consistently saying, and a lot of Republicans followed his lead by saying, do not trust mailing in, go to the polls, make your voice heard. The Democrats are trying to manipulate the process somehow with you sending your ballot in and not, directly handing it to a pollster or a poll worker. And so we were able to kind of really guess pretty accurately how this was going to unfold. So all of these states went red in the beginning because they processed the in-person count first. Because, like you said, Republican legislatures, despite being asked by their respective secretaries of state to allow for more processing time, or perhaps to even count them early, were denied, that ability to do so. So then they had to actually count these ballots that were actually received before Election Day. after the in-person voting account was completed. So that's why we're seeing that, red, and then flip to blue much later, because it takes a lot longer to count those ballots and to take them out of the envelopes, and you got to scan them, and then you have to reconcile them if there's errors, and it's a whole laborious process.
And
yeah,
Audra,
I thought it was, sorry, I
no,
just want to say,
okay.
I thought it was really interesting that, in quite a few states, it almost was as if, the method in which you voted kind of served as like a proxy party affiliation statement almost.
Yep.
Even though, you don't have to, at least in the state of Michigan, when you register to vote, you don't have to choose, a party affiliation. To a certain extent, it was a little bit of a party affiliation statement if you chose to vote either, day of in person or by mail. And that was interesting. I don't know if that's a trend, that we'll see continuing to move forward, because now in Michigan, it's fairly new that you can vote by mail without having to declare a reason why. So, in future elections, that will be interesting to see if that trend continues. I also wanted to mention, I don't ever want to hear in any election moving forward that your vote does not matter. Because last night on CNN, we were watching updates in Georgia of 93 additional ballots being counted at a time. And I have never seen something that close and that many people focusing on counties that I've never heard of in other states, and being incredibly invested in interviews with local clerks and that sort of thing. When you see less than 2,000 votes making that distinction and flipping the state of Georgia blue, that sort of thing makes that case so strongly and so starkly for the fact that every single vote, every single election counts, whether you believe it or not. It's true. That's just how math and numbers work. There's no way to deny that. And to see that so clearly, on the national stage, I think is shocking for some people, but also that's how it's always been. It's never been the case that your vote doesn't matter. It's just a little more noticeable this time around with such, close states still waiting for that, last 2% of votes to come in to call a state.
Right, and as we are almost out of time, but I think it's important to mention, for some people that are saying, well, there might not be evidence of widespread fraud, but isn't it a little suspicious in all these swing states that, all the votes came in for Biden? It's not.
No.
And a good example of looking at, as we've talked about, the states that had more time to count these ballots, two key swing states, Florida and Ohio, that were both won by President Trump, allowed, actually they counted mail-in ballots first. So the exact opposite happened, where it looked like Vice President Biden was in the lead, but as those election day things came in, which we knew was going to skew toward the president, came in, those states ended up turning red, which is something that was totally predictable and is not, evidence of fraud. And
democracy in action.
for Republicans
it's
at the top of the ballot, it's one thing if the president does it, because as Jake Tapper on CNN said last night, for the past 4 years he's had a casual relationship with the truth. Okay, but here in Michigan, we're seeing a Republican Senate candidate, John James, has refused to concede, even though it looks the AP has called the race for Gary Peters for re-election. They're saying, he's got something to hide. His silence on the issue makes it something to hide. Ronna McDaniel, who's a national RNC chairwoman, and Michigan GOP chairwoman Laura Cox just held a media availability saying, well, we have evidence of fraud in Wayne County. You have to present the evidence. You can't just say, or people weren't letting in. And there were complaints about the situation in Cobo, or as now it's called TCF Center.
Oh yeah, sorry. It's still Cobo Hall in my heart.
Cobo Hall to us. But anyway, reporters were there. Do not call on the media, be like, you guys need to investigate this. We are there. The reporters in the TCF Center said there were 134 Republican challengers, 134 Democratic challengers, 134 nonpartisan challengers. Guys, at a certain point,
everyone had a fair chance to observe. Everyone, So when we see these reports of these people storming the castle to try to get in because they think that there's and it's the majority Trump supporters thinking mistakenly that there's some sort of, shenanigans that are going on with, ballot manipulation. What they don't understand is that they weren't allowed into the building. And so then that kind of created a semi-chaotic situation. And then it turned out that it was because they had reached the capacity for how many human beings they could have in the building because of COVID and social distancing protocols. I mean, this is really, it's just, I think that a lot of people who are kind of like really worked up with the hysteria and the paranoia and the fear are just, you're looking for zebras. And really, it's usually just a horse, like you're intentionally trying to find a zebra at some point, and it's just getting kind of ridiculous. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I think it's become very clear, as the national results have come in and we see that there's, the writing is kind of on the wall of who's going to be the winner. I think it's also become, extra clear that the Republicans are not going to go down without a fight that does not have merit, but it's not going to stop them from trying to make that argument.
It's definitely an unprecedented time in American history, really. We are out of time. I have the less than a minute notification on my Zoom screen right now, so I hate to rush us out of here. But anyway, thanks as always for listening, for watching. For Audra and Sarah, I'm Arpan. Thanks again. This has been another edition of From the Newsroom with the Holland Sentinel.